What truly defines the weight of a person's heart? Is it their wealth, their beauty, their power, or the way they treat those who have none of these things? Life often reveals the truth in the smallest of moments. A word spoken in anger, a gesture overlooked, or the silence we keep when no one is watching. It is in those hidden corners of everyday life that the soul is laid bare. Arjun Mehta was a man the world admired. A self-made millionaire, he had built his empire not from inheritance but from sleepless nights and relentless effort. Yet, despite his success, he carried a simplicity that drew people to him. Those who worked with him often whispered that he treated his driver and his business partner with the same respect. To him, dignity was never earned by status. It was a birthright. By his side stood Sofia Sharma, a woman who seemed like the perfect partner. Beautiful, poised, and confident, she matched Arjun's world of grandeur with her elegance. Their photographs together often appeared in magazines, painting the portrait of a dream couple, one built on success and charm. In the quiet corners of their home, however, lived another soul, Meera. She was in her mid-40s, a woman with kind eyes and hands worn from years of labor. She had been their maid for nearly 2 years, moving silently through the house, ensuring everything was in place. Meera carried herself with quiet dignity, never raising her voice, never demanding more than what life had handed her. But fate has a way of testing the masks people wear. Beneath polished smiles, hidden truths linger, waiting for the right moment to break free. Arjun often believed love was enough to see the goodness in people. He believed Sofia's charm was genuine, her kindness as effortless as her laughter. Yet, deep within the fabric of their daily life, threads of arrogance slowly wove themselves into something darker. And one day, when the veil slipped, Arjun would come face to face with a truth that shattered not only his love, but also his understanding of human nature. Because in the end, it is not how we treat those above us that defines us, but how we treat those we think are beneath us. The morning began like any other in the Meera household. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, draping golden warmth across the marble floors. The air was quiet, filled only with the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen where Meera worked with her usual grace. Arjun had woken early, preparing to leave for an important meeting. But as he walked past the staircase, he paused. From the living room below, voices floated upward, one sharp, the other subdued. Something in the tone caught his attention. He stepped closer, careful not to be heard. What he saw in that moment rooted him to the floor. Sofia stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes burning with irritation. Before her, Meera stood silently, clutching a tray she had just set down. The older woman's face was lowered, her shoulders drawn inward, as if shielding herself from an invisible storm. Sofia's voice sliced through the air, laced with disdain. Though Arjun could not hear every word, the harshness was unmistakable. She pointed to the tray, then toward the floor, as if even the smallest mistake was an unforgivable crime. Meera nodded quietly, her lips pressed together, her silence holding more weight than Sofia's anger ever could. She did not defend herself, nor did she protest. She absorbed the humiliation with the quiet strength of someone who had weathered storms far greater than insults. From where he stood, Arjun's chest tightened. His world felt suddenly unsteady, as though the image of love he had carefully built was crumbling before his eyes. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he believed shared his values, was a stranger in this moment. And yet, it was not the cruelty alone that broke him. It was the contrast, the sight of Meera's bowed head, her quiet endurance against Sofia's arrogance. Dignity and humility stood across from pride and power, and in that silent battle, Arjun saw the truth of both women. He remained still, his breath caught, his heart torn between disbelief and sorrow. For sometimes the deepest betrayals are not found in lies or secrets, but in the way a person chooses to treat another human being when they believe no one is watching. The silence after Sofia's outburst lingered heavier than her words. The sound of a glass settling back on the tray echoed faintly in the room, as if time itself had paused to listen. Arjun stood halfway down the staircase, hidden in the shadows, his hand gripping the wooden rail. His heart beat unevenly, each thud carrying the weight of disbelief. This was the woman he had once imagined building a life with, the woman who charmed every room she entered with a flawless smile. Yet here, stripped of the audience and the admiration, her true reflection stood bare before him. Sofia did not notice him at first. She moved with agitation, straightening a vase on the table as though even in her anger she demanded perfection. Meera had quietly stepped aside, her eyes lowered, carrying the hurt within her but refusing to let it spill. That quiet grace pierced Arjun more than any confrontation could. And then, as if guided by instinct, Sofia turned. Her eyes flickered upward toward the staircase. In that instant, she froze. The confident mask she wore cracked under the weight of Arjun's silent gaze. His expression held no anger, no accusations, only a stillness so heavy it felt louder than any words. The room shifted. The arrogance that had moments ago burned in Sofia's face faltered into uncertainty. She opened her mouth as if to explain, but the silence pressed down harder, making excuses impossible. For in that gaze, she knew she had been seen, not the version of herself she showed the world, but the truth she thought she had hidden. Arjun did not move, nor did he speak. His silence was deliberate, his eyes carrying a question far greater than any words could hold. Who are you when no one is watching? In that moment, Sofia felt stripped bare, her heart pounding with the realization that love cannot survive the weight of cruelty. Meera stood quietly still, the only witness to a truth that could no longer be undone. And so, the room remained suspended, 3 lives entangled in one fragile silence, standing at the edge of a revelation that would change everything. The air in the room had grown unbearably heavy, pressing against Sofia's chest. For a long moment, she stood frozen, staring into Arjun's silent eyes. There was no shouting, no demand for answers, only the quiet weight of disappointment. And somehow, that silence struck harder than any spoken accusation ever could. Her fingers trembled against the polished vase, her breath uneven. She wanted to turn away, to hide. But the truth had already cornered her. The facade of elegance, the walls of pride, everything she had built around herself was crumbling. And with nowhere left to run, something inside her broke open. The sharpness in her gaze softened. Her lips quivered. Her shoulders fell. For the first time in years, Sofia looked less like the woman who commanded every room, and more like the little girl she had once been. Tears brimmed at the corners of her eyes, slipping past the defenses she could no longer hold. She lowered herself into the chair nearby, her strength abandoning her. In that fragile silence, memories she had buried came rushing back. Memories of her own childhood, where poverty had been her shadow. She had been the one wearing torn clothes, the one mocked in school for the smell of her old shoes, the one treated as though her worth was tied to her father's empty pockets. The arrogance she carried as an adult had not been born from superiority. It had been born from fear. Fear of ever being seen as small again. Fear of being powerless. Each harsh word she had flung at Meera had been less about the maid's mistake, and more about the battle she still fought within herself. Meera stood quietly by the wall, watching her crumble. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no triumph. Only a quiet compassion, as if she understood the pain Sofia's anger had tried to mask. Arjun remained still, his heart heavy, yet softened by the rawness before him. He had expected denial, excuses, anger. Instead, what he saw was something unexpected. A woman stripped of her pride, revealing the wounds that had shaped her cruelty. The silence shifted. What moments ago had been an act of humiliation was slowly becoming an act of revelation. For a long while, no one spoke. The room was suspended in a fragile stillness, as though the walls themselves were listening. Sofia's tears fell freely now, streaking down the face once so carefully composed. She no longer tried to hide behind her elegance. She simply allowed the truth to spill, raw and unshielded. Her eyes lifted slowly toward Meera, who still stood with her hands folded in quiet patience. Sofia's voice trembled as she whispered an apology, not with grandeur, not with excuses, but with the humility of someone who had finally seen herself clearly for the first time. She lowered her head, a gesture Meera had never expected to witness. The woman who once looked at her as though she were invisible now sought her forgiveness with folded hands and tearful eyes.